Welcome back. All right. So, as you can see, I've got a board put together here of number one draft picks. And Macklin Celebrini is the latest. And there were some things I wanted to look at with number one draft picks because there's a lot of pressure on number one draft picks. You have to show that you are the absolute best in your draft class. And that's pretty much right out of the gate because almost every player on the board, right after they get drafted first overall, they're right in the NHL. Very rare that they're not in the NHL right away. And rare enough that I think Eric Johnson's the only one on the board that didn't play in his first eligible season to be a National Hockey League player, and it was not lockout related as it was with Alex Ovechkin. So starting with Marc-Andre Fleury because he's still in the league, he's still playing 21 years later. He was drafted first overall in 2003. Plays in the National Hockey League that first year, and there was a lot of debate about it that first year too, about whether they were rushing him, was this going to ruin his development? Well, he's number two all time in wins in the National Hockey League, so that's a pretty excellent record right there. He won Stanley Cups in 2009, 2016, and 2017. Goes all the way to the final, of course, with Vegas in 2018, and he won the Vezina Trophy with Vegas in 2021. So, Hall of Famer, yep, three Stanley Cups, a Vezina winner, yep. So Marc-Andre Fleury is the number one draft pick. Even though the 2003 draft class is so stacked, and that was an absolutely amazing draft year, I think Marc-Andre Fleury, you can make the argument, still the best player from that draft class. 2004, you draft Alex Ovechkin first overall. 2004, 2005, of course, there's a lockout, there's no season, so he's unable to play in the 04-05 season in the National Hockey League, which meant that Crosby and Ovechkin were rookies together. So he's number two all time in goals in the National Hockey League. He won the Stanley Cup in 2018. Three times won the Hart Trophy, and 9 times he's won the Rocket Richard Trophy. So the interesting thing to me, first off, is that cup in 2018 is 14 years after he was drafted first overall. And there was plenty of discussion about whether or not Ovechkin was enough of a team player to win that Stanley Cup before he won it, of course, and whether the Caps would ever get out of the second round. So that one Stanley Cup for Alex Ovechkin silenced a lot of doubters. 2005, of course, Sidney Crosby. So he's playing in the NHL right away because he's Sidney Crosby. He is currently number 10 all time on the points list, and he's only going to keep going up, of course. 2009, 2016, 2017 Stanley Cups, absolutely. He is a two-time Hart winner. He has also won the Conn Smythe twice. And worthy of note, Ovechkin won the Conn Smythe as well the year that he won the Stanley Cup. So Crosby and Ovechkin are kind of the standard bearers in terms of number one overall draft picks that are currently playing in the National Hockey League. And yeah, I can't say anything other than they're two of the best players in the history of the game. We're going to see Ovechkin at some point, the number one guy in goals all time. And for Crosby, well, he wants that fourth Stanley Cup ring, right? Now, 2006 is Eric Johnson being drafted first overall. He didn't debut in the NHL until the 2007-2008 season. He did win a Stanley Cup in 2022 with the Colorado Avalanche. Johnson, of course, not a superstar player, but a good defenseman? Sure. Good top four? Yep. Good top two at his peak? Sure. So Johnson obviously pales in comparison to the other names on the list up here and down here as well, but still pretty solid overall number one draft pick. So in 2007, Patrick Kane is the number one overall draft pick. He, of course, in the NHL right away. And all of them are. So I won't need to say that going forward because everybody from here is playing in the NHL right after they're drafted. Patrick Kane sits 38th all time in points. He won Stanley Cups in 2010, 2013, and 2015. He won the Hart Trophy once. He also won the Conn Smythe Trophy during one of those Stanley Cup wins for Chicago. So Patrick Kane, Hall of Famer, yes. He is going to keep climbing that points list as well now that he's with Detroit and he has a chance to play a full season there. And as the number one draft pick goes, I don't think there's more you could want from Patrick Kane. In 2008, it's Steven Stamkos with Tampa. He is, of course, a player who's been in the NHL since a very turbulent rookie season. The first half of which he kind of looked out of place and Barry Melrose wasn't a big fan of him staying in the big show. Kind of felt like he should have been sent back. However, you make a change behind the bench. All of a sudden, Stamkos has a really solid second half of the season. And from there on, it's been quite the story. Stamkos is 30th all-time in goals for the National Hockey League. Won Stanley Cups, of course, in 2020 and 2021. And he's won the Rocket Richard Trophy twice. So in terms of the success in the playoffs and just all the accolades, it's kind of from Stamkos up, which is interesting to me. So 2009, John Tavares, the number one draft pick, of course, for the New York Islanders. He is currently 61st all-time in goals. He was a first-team All-Star in 2015, and he's one of those ones that you can make the argument for him being in the Hall of Fame. You can absolutely make an argument against him being in the Hall of Fame as well. But John Tavares, of course, still seeking that first Stanley Cup, still in Toronto as we speak, finishing out his contract there. We'll see if he extends. But here he is, he is a star player, but I would say in terms of his overall career, I don't think I'd put him in the same category as Stamkos, Kane, Crosby, Ovechkin. But that's me. You guys can let me know your thoughts. 2010, Taylor Hall. So that's why I'm wearing the Taylor Hall jersey here. It's one of the few times I can wear the Taylor Hall Edmonton jersey. Joins the National Hockey League right away. He won a Hart Trophy in New Jersey. He didn't win that in Edmonton. Taylor Hall has bounced around the league a little bit recently. He's currently in Chicago in sort of a mentorship role there. But the offense, we're hoping will return, of course, to where it was, say, 5 years ago. But yeah, Taylor Hall, good career. Good career, absolutely. Great career? Well, that's up for debate. 2011, the Oilers again. They draft Ryan Nugent-Hopkins first overall. Ryan Nugent-Hopkins eventually finds his place as one of the better two-way forwards in the game. He can play on the wing. He can play down the middle. He can play on a third line, second line, or first line. He is one of those Swiss Army knife type players. And so, yeah, Nugent-Hopkins, excellent player, drafted first overall. No awards and accolades beyond that, but a very good player nonetheless. 2012, fail for Nail Yakupov, drafted by the Edmonton Oilers, who won a lot of draft lotteries. And Nail Yakupov heads off to Edmonton. A lot of fanfare. He did have some memorable goal celebrations, and he looked fine through, I would say, the first year and a half of his career, and then he never progressed beyond that. So, Yakupov, of the number one draft picks on the board, I would have to put Yakupov, if I was ranking these, I'd have to put Yakupov at the bottom, but it's the 2012 draft. That draft, an absolute, not a total disaster, but there's a lot of questionable picks in there because that draft class just didn't work. 2013, Nathan MacKinnon is drafted first overall. MacKinnon does not have the kind of resume that these guys have, but he's working on it. So 2022, he wins the Stanley Cup. He also has a Hart Trophy to his name from this year. So he is starting to build up that resume. And I would say that 5 years from now, if I do this again, obviously he'd be moving up the board because some of these guys would retire. But I think that we'll see at least one more Stanley Cup for Colorado would be my guess. I think they're built really, really well. I think that they're an excellent team pretty much from top to bottom. So I think another Stanley Cup's probably there. And for MacKinnon, I don't think he's going to only have one Hart Trophy. I'd be kind of surprised if he didn't have more. And who knows, maybe a Conn Smythe there too. 2014, Aaron Ekblad is drafted first overall by Florida. And again, another player just makes it to the league right away. The questions of whether or not you put a defenseman in the league right away are out there. But Ekblad did all right. He won the Calder Trophy, so he did pretty well. And of course, he won the Stanley Cup with Florida this year. There are those who say he's overrated, those who say he's underrated. I think that as long as he can stay healthy, I think Ekblad can be a very solid top four defender. And that's not too shabby with a number one draft pick. Connor McDavid drafted in 2015. So again, a player who right now is working on getting into this kind of category when it comes to the amount of awards and everything else. He'll get there. He is already 72nd all-time in assists. So that's remarkable. He has 3 Hart Trophies. He has a Rocket Richard, and this season he won the Conn Smythe, helping Edmonton get all the way to Game 7 of the Stanley Cup Final. So, yeah, McDavid is working on building up a resume like this. What he's missing is those Stanley Cups. Edmonton's working on it. Last night, Sportsnet making their Stanley Cup picks. There was a lot of Edmonton. No Vancouver, but I get it. And so and this is where I was talking about the pressure for Edmonton. Maybe it's not from the fans, but definitely there's an expectation for the Oilers to be, if not Stanley Cup champions this year, at least really, really close to it. 2016, of course, Toronto wins the draft lottery and they draft Austin Matthews, and that was the whole point of tanking the 15-16 season. 3 Rocket Richard trophies for Austin Matthews to this point. He also has a Hart Trophy to his name. So for Austin Matthews, the awards are coming, but that one that he wants is that Stanley Cup, and he has not reached that level yet, as we know. We've talked about Toronto in this channel plenty. I don't need to get into the Stanley Cup side of things. Just in this case, it's one thing that's keeping Matthews from being in that same conversation as others, but keep in mind that with the way he's producing goals, he's going to be top 100 in goals soon enough. If he records a 70-goal season this year, and he could, we'll definitely be doing some videos on Matthews, which, of course, I mean, it's not like Matthews gets a lot of attention, right? Right. 2017, Nico Hischier, and this is where things get interesting. From 2017 until now, we're looking at picks that are still kind of coming into their own and kind of becoming the star players we know they're going to be. In Nico Hischier's case, when he's drafted first overall, the expectation was Selke. And I think we're going to start seeing that from Hischier over the next couple years. I think he has that capability of being an excellent two-way forward and of garnering a lot of attention as an excellent two-way forward. As for championships, well, New Jersey's not there yet, but I do think that New Jersey's on the right track. And so Nico Hischier could be one of the leaders that way. And yeah, we could end up looking at Nico Hischier and seeing him with a similar track record as, say, like a Patrick Kane. He'll have a lot of points and assists maybe at some point in his career. We'll see what the ceiling is for Hischier. I think he needs a full healthy season and with healthy line mates and teammates around him, and I think we could see some good numbers from Hischier. Rasmus Dahlin, drafted first overall by Buffalo in 2018. There's a Norris Trophy, I would think, in the future for Rasmus Dahlin. He had the excellent start to the season in 2022-2023, and if we see that Rasmus Dahlin over a full 82-game schedule, he will definitely garner a ton of attention when it comes to the Norris Trophy, but he's one of those dark horses. Even for this season, I would think he's a dark horse. 2019, New Jersey, drafting first overall again. They get Jack Hughes, and Jack Hughes is an excellent young forward. Another one that if he can stay healthy the full season, could find himself getting some hardware like guys on this side of the board here. Jack Hughes is that talented. And I think with the injury combined with the fact that New Jersey underachieved last year, it kind of feels like he's a little bit underrated at this point, but that's just me. So yeah, Jack Hughes, we'll see how he does this year. And then you get into the ones where I don't think we quite know what we're going to see from, say, Alexis Lafreniere. Drafted first overall in 2020. And the trick with Lafreniere is I don't think he's ever going to be like a guy who scores 100, 110 points in a season. But I think he's going to be an excellent forward who can get to that point per game range. And I think there's a lot there. That being said, the Rangers are also a contender. Maybe we see a Stanley Cup for the Rangers and Alexis Lafreniere. And if they win a Stanley Cup, I don't think they're going to be all that concerned with how many points Lafreniere gets or what happens with Kaapo Kakko. All they're going to say is, yeah, but Stanley Cup. Stanley Cup fixes all of the errors that management makes. That's how that works at the time. 2021, Buffalo, drafting first overall again, and they get Owen Power. Another blue liner. Excellent potential. I think Owen Power is going to be really good for a long time. Maybe at some point we see a Norris Trophy for him as well. Tricky part for Buffalo, of course, is we see Stanley Cups for some of these players over here. A Conn Smythe here for McDavid, a Stanley Cup for Ekblad. I hope at some point Buffalo wins the Stanley Cup. That's as far as I'm going to go with it. Yeah, I hope at some point we see it happen. There's definitely some long-suffering fans in Buffalo. I say that as a Canuck fan where there's some long-suffering going on there too. But yeah, Owen Power, excellent young defenseman. It'll be interesting to see how Buffalo approaches that blue line now that they have Byram as well, and things can get really expensive. Juraj Slafkovsky, drafted first overall by Montreal in 2022. There were plenty of conversations when he came in about whether or not he was physically ready. And it makes sense for people to question it, but I think it also makes sense for a team to bring in that guy who's the number one overall draft pick. And I think sometimes they ease a player into the lineup. So we look and we go, well, that's not what he was expected to do. So he stinks. He's a flop. He's a bust. When in reality, the team's looking at the player and going, all right, we know what he's going to be. How are we going to get him there? The best way to do it is to have him on our roster and gradually build him up to that, while everybody's saying, well, that's not what we expected. We expected 30 goals from this guy. Where is it? Well, Slavkovsky had a really good second half this past season, parlays that into an excellent long-term extension with Montreal in the offseason. So it'll be fun to watch him this year and see how things develop. Connor Bedard, drafted first overall in 2023. The comparisons for Bedard have been towards the Sidney Crosby side of things, although Patrick Kane's name I've heard come up as well. But he won the Calder in his first year. Last night, in a game against Utah, he had 2 assists to start the season with a couple of points already. And it's only notable because last year he did struggle out of the gate. He had problems getting the puck to go in the net for him and picking up points early in the season. So at least he's not had that problem to start this season, and maybe he'll be able to keep that going. Chicago should be a better team this year, which should help his points totals, but we shall see. And of course, this year it's Macklin Celebrini for San Jose. So when we look over here, one thing I wanted to point out too. So Pittsburgh, they won a Stanley Cup. They drafted a first overall pick. Washington, yep, first overall. They get a Stanley Cup. St. Louis eventually gets a cup in 2019, but Eric Johnson's not on that team. Chicago, 3 Stanley Cups for them. Tampa Bay, 2 Stanley Cups for them. The Islanders, not that level of success. The Oilers get to the final in 2024. Hall is gone. Yakupov's gone. Nugent Hopkins and McDavid, big parts of that Stanley Cup finalist team this year. Colorado wins the Stanley Cup. Florida wins the Stanley Cup. Toronto having its struggles in the postseason. New Jersey trying to get back to the postseason. For Buffalo, not a ton of success there. Montreal trying to do the slow build and then go for a Stanley Cup once they're ready. And of course, Chicago now is in a rebuild, the same as they were when Patrick Kane's drafted in 2007, and then they win the Cup in 2010. And of course, San Jose at the bottom of the board in the midst of their rebuild. So I do think the number one draft picks generally end up being worth the hype. I think they end up being worthy of all of the accolades for the most part. But let me know your thoughts. Which of the number one draft picks on this board do you think are underrated? Which one do you think is overrated? And which one do you think was the biggest disappointment not named Nail Yakupov? Because Yakupov would be the one, right? So let me know your thoughts and even throw in like, well, this one's not talked about enough. Why don't we talk about this number one draft pick enough? Let me know your thoughts. Do hit like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. It's great to have hockey back. And it's fun to talk about number one draft picks. And next year, it may very well be James Higgins that's going on the board. And we'll see if he debuts in the NHL right away after he's maybe drafted first overall. I haven't done a video on Higgins yet, but at some point soon I will, because he is seen as the most likely number one draft pick for 2025. And then he gets added to the list, and the pressure is on. Thank you guys so much for all your support as always. If you haven't already hit like and subscribe, please do. I will talk to you again soon.